guys, it's Kira and welcome to another weekly vlog. Before we go any further, let's kick things off with a tea taste test, because what better way to start a vlog than with tea? Now today I've gone a bit rogue. I'm actually trying a tea that my friend Em gave me a long time ago and I just never actually got around to trying it, and it is Tea Pigs Rhubarb and Ginger. Now Tea Pigs and I have a somewhat difficult relationship. Now if you guys were following me Christmas of 2020, I had my very first tea advent calendar, which was a wonderfully exciting experience, and it was the Tea Pigs advent calendar, but there were definitely more misses than hits in the Tea Pigs calendar, and there were a lot of flavours that I just wasn't so keen on. So I've never really gone deep into their teas since then because I just have been put off by some of the flavours that I didn't really enjoy. But today we have rhubarb and ginger, which could go one of two ways, to be honest. I generally quite like a ginger tea because I find it very warming and comforting, and again, just like a nice easy drink, similar to peppermint teas. They're kind of like the main herbal group of teas that I'll turn to. A lemon and ginger is a combination that I really enjoy. So the ginger side I'm fairly confident with. However, rhubarb, I think I imagine rhubarb to be something different than it is, and actually this year just gone in 2021, when I did my tea advent calendar, I had a rhubarb flavored tea and I was told off by someone in the comments for referring to rhubarb as a fruit, when in fact I think it is like a root or a stick. I don't actually know what rhubarb is, but I think it isn't a fruit apparently, but in my mind it is a fruit, and I think that's because the place where I would most likely see rhubarb is in a like fruit pie or a crumble or something like that. So in my mind I associate it with fruit and therefore expect it to be quite flavourful and sweet. And then also I think the colour of it being so bright pink, and obviously that's the vibe they've gone for the packaging, also makes me think that it should be like vibrant and sweet and fruity, and it's not. So I'm trying to adjust my expectations before I try this tea. It definitely smells gingery, that is the leading smell, which is a promising thing because like I said, I like ginger tea. So without further ado, cheers to rhubarb and ginger. Let's see what this is all about. Oh yeah, I can go for that. Gingery, absolutely lovely. Good. It still hasn't given me much clarity on what flavour rhubarb is, because the only flavour I'm really getting from that is ginger. So if you're a big rhubarb person, then you might be disappointed by this tea because I don't think there's really a strong flavour coming through. But if, like me, you're big on ginger, it's lovely. There is a slightly, I guess, more, I'm trying to think what the word is, kind of like a little bit more of a zesty, or like I don't really know what the word is because it's not super zesty, but there is a flavour coming through that is not ginger, but it's kind of like an after flavour. So the ginger leads and I think the rhubarb follows, and for me I think that's the way I'd like it to be. So another week, another successful tea taste test. So that is a wonderful way to kick off this vlog. Now on to reading, because of course I try to do at least a little bit of reading every weekend, and it is currently Friday in case you were wondering. So this weekend is the 4th of February currently, so we're approaching the season of love, Valentine's Day, and that always makes me feel like a little bit like I fancy reading some romances. So I've decided to go for a festive romance and a classic romance. So in terms of the classic romance, I'm going to be starting Persuasion by Jane Austen. This is the final Jane Austen novel in my All About Austen read along, so I'm very excited about that. It's a reread for me. I read this for the first time at university, so a few years ago now, and I didn't dislike it at the time by any stretch of the imagination. I quite enjoyed reading it from a studying point of view, but I do think reading a book to study and analyse and critique is a very different experience than reading for pure enjoyment. So I'm really excited to see how I feel about this book, reading it purely for pleasure rather than anything sort of like more in depth in terms of my analysis. I'm just reading it and seeing how I enjoy it as a book and for its entertainment value. So it's a reread, but I feel like it's going to be kind of like going at it with fresh eyes, which is always a nice experience. So there we have my classic romance. In terms of my festive romance, it's not Christmas, I'm aware of that, but it was a choice between two rereads or a new read, but it being a festive one. So I've gone for that option, and I'm going to be reading The Christmas Bookshop by Jenny Corgan. Now, the reason I've decided to go for this is because I was gifted this one for Christmas, so by the time I actually opened it, Christmas had been and gone, but I don't really want to wait until next Christmas to read it. So I'm just screwing the rules and I'm just gonna go for it because I love Jenny Colgan. And also, despite this being called The Christmas Bookshop, I've read The Christmas Island and Christmas at the Island Hotel, and while they're set around Christmas, the main theme is the characters and their relationships, and it just happens to be set at Christmas time. So I don't really feel like the actual festivity should impact my reading experience too much because they're not uber festive, they just happen to be set at Christmas time, and I'm assuming that is what the case will be with this one as well. So we've got a very contemporary romance and a classic one, and I'm excited for both of these. I feel like they're both going to be fun romance reading experiences, and I for one cannot wait. So that's what's on the reading agenda, and I'm going to enjoy the rest of my rhubarb and ginger cup of tea, and I think I might start with a couple of chapters of the old Persuasion, and then in a couple of hours I'm heading out to meet Jay in town after he finishes work. We're going to do a little bit of shopping, mostly to pick up his mum's birthday present because it's her birthday in a few weeks, and I'm sure I might fall into a coffee shop while we're out. So that's what's on the agenda. Let's get to reading. Saturday, guys. As per usual, my Friday went super quickly. I did get my Pret yesterday, which was a delight. Although, can we just talk for a second about how bad the chai shortage is in Pret? I don't know if any of you guys also have had this experience, but as we know, I'm a big fan of a Pret oat milk chai latte. So I walked in yesterday afternoon, very confidently asked for that order because it was exactly what I wanted. And lo and behold, the guy behind the counter just said, "We're out of chai." And I could not tell you how many times this has happened to me. It is so frequent. I would say over 50% of the amount of time I ask for a chai, I am responded to with the fact that Pret is out. And I remember when I went to London for my sister's 18th birthday back in October, London has so many Prets. It's literally like every other step you take, you find a new Pret. And I asked in every single Pret that I found if I could have an oat milk chai. All of them had it like out of stock. I was shocked and appalled. So anyway, that was my chai story from yesterday. I ended up getting my second favourite drink, which is an oat milk vanilla latte, and it was delicious and absolutely necessary because I was freezing yesterday, so cold. And then aside from that, Jay and I just came home, had some dinner, watched The Apprentice, got an early night because we had to get up super early this morning to go to the gym before Jay went to work. So that is where my lack of updates yesterday afternoon came in. But I did start on some reading, so let's dive into some thoughts thoughts on these books. So I made my first start with Persuasion, and I did only make a very little start on this one. I read 3 chapters before I went out to meet Jay yesterday afternoon, and I'm really enjoying it, as has been the experience with every single Jane Austen reread that I've done for my Jane Austen read-along. I have just been so much more receptive to the humour of her books than I remember being the first time around reading them. Now that might be because, like I mentioned yesterday, the first time I read this book it was for university, so I was reading it from like a critiquing point of view rather than just like appreciating the book for what it was. But even still, her other books that I haven't read for studying, I just feel like the first time I read them all I didn't really appreciate how funny they were, except for Sense and Sensibility, which I definitely liked and found funny the first time around. But all of the other ones, I'm going into it, reading it the second time around, and just being like so confused by how I didn't find them funny when I first read them. But this one I think is interesting because most of her books start with quite a succinct description of her main character. So in the case of Persuasion, our main character is a lady called Anne Elliot, and Anne is a little bit older than some of Jane Austen's other protagonists. She is in her mid-20s, and essentially this book focuses on a like long lost romance where she ended up like turning a guy down for a proposal when she was younger, and then he comes back into her life now that she's in her mid-20s, and it's kind of about like the reigniting of that love and also just the fact of like dealing with what was lost and all of that kind of stuff. So it's a little bit interesting and different to her other books, which focus on a young lady kind of like going out into society for the first time and trying to find a husband. So that is our main character, and because of Anne being slightly different to Jane Austen's other protagonists, I think the way that she starts this book is very clever. So instead of giving us a really quick and simple summary of the main character, we instead get a summary of Anne's dad, who is, I think, a very amusing but not very nice character. So it starts off by saying, Sir Walter Elliot of Kellynch Hall in Somersetshire was a man for who his own amusement never took up any book but the baronetage. There he found occupation for an idle hour and consolation in a distressed one. And then it says, he could read his own history with an interest which never failed. This was the page at which his favourite volume always opened. Elliot of Kellynch Hall. And then it goes on to literally just say his name, his wife's name, their children, and when they were born, and essentially we just get this introduction of Anne Elliot's dad, Walter, as a very boring but also super self-obsessed main character. So he has like this major main character energy going on in his life because he isn't interested in anything else other than himself, his social standing, and basically like how everyone else perceives him, and he thinks he's really interesting, so then thinks everyone else must think that as well. And I just think that's a very, very interesting way to start this book, because we immediately get this sense of who Anne is as a character, living in the shadows. Meanwhile, her dad and her eldest sister Elizabeth are just like there in the limelight. And I think the way that she starts the book by choosing not to introduce us first to the main character but instead to the people that she's surrounded by just immediately sets up Anne as this like, I guess more like, what's the word, understated, like a much more understated main character. And I think it's a very interesting but very clever way to kind of introduce us to her and tell us something very important about her character without actually saying anything about her at all. So that is all I have to say on Persuasion so far. But then I also made a start on the Christmas Bookshop. I did some reading of this one this morning alongside my breakfast, and I've made a little bit more progress with this one because I'm on page 70. Now naturally, because this is like a contemporary romance and it has much bigger text and like bigger margins, I'm getting through this one a lot faster than I am getting through Persuasion, but I'm definitely enjoying it. It's not got quite the same charm as An Island Christmas or Christmas at the Island Hotel, and I think those two books are just set on such like a remote island with a really tight-knit community that they just have this instant feeling of like warmth and welcoming, and it really makes me feel like Gilmore Girls and the way that Starred Hollow feels. So that's how I feel about those Jenny Corgan books, and this is the first one of her books that I'm reading that isn't as part of that Island series. But this one is set in Edinburgh, and we have a main character, Carmen, who has recently lost her job, and we're set up with this knowledge that Carmen is like the younger sister out of 2, and she is the one who is basically like the failure of the family. Meanwhile, her older sister Sophia is a successful lawyer. She's got 3 children, she's married, she is is very rich, she's pregnant with a fourth child, and essentially is everything that Carmen is not. And so there's a definite resentment between the two sisters, and they're not very close. But Carmen loses her job at the beginning of this book, and then her sister ends up managing to find her another job somewhere more locally to her, and Carmen ends up moving in. So there's a little bit of tension, a lot of comedy going on between that sister interaction, and the job that her sister finds her is, as it turns out, to work in a failing, decrepit bookshop that is run by an old man who is very much about to lose his business, but he needs someone else to come in and try and turn things around in the lead up to Christmas. So I love the premise, I think it's really fun. I haven't warmed to the characters as much as I have, say, like with the Island series, because like I said, those characters are just so wholesome. These ones are a little bit more prickly because of that like sister tension dynamic, but I'm definitely finding that the more I get through, the more I like the characters, and I'm very interested to see where it goes. So that's where we're at with the reading. As I mentioned, it is Saturday morning. And on the agenda today is nails, because I haven't had my nails done in like a month, so they are very overgrown and I'm very excited to have fresh ones done. At the moment I'm just sticking to very like nude nails, and I think they look very nice and classy, and also they don't look too bad when they've grown out. So heading out to get my nails done, and then Sarah is coming around later and we are filming a very exciting video, something to do with a classics read along. I will not say any more, but very excited to film that announcement because I think it's going to be really fun. If you are on team, as soon as your last social engagement of the day is done, you get into pyjamas immediately, because same over here, honestly, just cannot even cope with the idea of having to wear jeans for even a second longer than is absolutely necessary, because pyjamas are just where it's at. I think it's definitely a winter thing, but I just cannot wait every day at the end of the work day or at the end of like a socializing day just to get into my pyjamas, and especially into this green fleecy thing that Jay got me for Christmas. And every single day I'm so grateful for the fact that I had asked for this specific Levi's green fleece top that I'd seen in there earlier in the year for Christmas from Jay, and my normal size would be a small, but they didn't have a small in this colour, and the green colour was what really sold it to me because I just think it's really cute. They actually only had an extra large, so I went for it. I went for the extra large. I thought, you know what, I don't care about the size, I just really want this fluffy hoodie thing. And I'm so glad that I did, because now it just feels like a warm hug. Like, I'm sure it would have been definitely still cozy if I got one in my actual size, but just having so much like room to move around, and it's just so spacious and cozy, I love. So very grateful for the fact that they didn't have my size in and we had to go up, because it has been the dream that I didn't even know I had come true. So love that for me. But as you might be able to tell from the fact that I have gotten into my pyjamas, Sarah has just left and we had a lovely afternoon. We watched Call the Midwife and ate some pasties and also scones, so it felt like a very British afternoon of a very like quintessential traditional foods, and then the like most classic British show ever, Called the Midwife, but loved that. And of course we also filmed our announcement video, which I'm very excited for. That is what the afternoon has consisted of, but now I'm just waiting for Jay to get back from work, so I think I'm going to do do a little bit of reading. I obviously have both books on the go, but I think I'm going to try and catch up a little bit further into Persuasion and read a few chapters of that. And then if Jay still isn't home, I might switch over and do some Christmas Bookshop. So let's read. Sunday, guys. It's certainly a happy Sunday in my household, mostly because when I got back from the gym this morning, I was inspired to light a candle, which might just seem like the simplest thing in the whole world, but I love candles. I feel like they transform a room, especially a scented candle, of course, but even just the aesthetic of a candle just makes a room feel so much like cozier and more welcoming. And then when it's got a really cozy scent, it's just out of this world. And I find that I generally light a lot of candles between autumn and Christmas time, and I just love getting in the festive spirit by picking scents that feel like they're made for that time of year. But then as soon as Christmas passes, I kind of just forget to light candles, even though it's still winter and still cozy vibes. I just forget to light them. But perhaps because I'm reading a Christmas themed book this weekend, I just felt inspired to light a candle that I actually got at Christmas time but hadn't lit yet, and it is from the brand Noah, and it is spiced ginger and vanilla. And oh my god, this is the best candle. Well, that's probably a bit dramatic, but it's definitely one of the best candles I've lit in a long time because it smells just like a gingerbread. Not too overpowering and not too artificial. It just smells like really wholesome baking, and my whole kitchen just smells like I've just had a batch of gingerbread in the oven because it has just filled the entire room, and I love it. I'm so here for it. So I'm feeling very cozy this morning, and I made the most of the cozy vibes by making a cup of coffee, sitting by the candle and getting started on some more reading of the Christmas Bookshop, which I'm really enjoying. I think, as I mentioned yesterday, I was enjoying the book from the start, but I kind of went into this one expecting something similar to her other books, where we have this very wholesome, welcoming cast of characters right from the very start, whereas actually in this book I think it's interesting that we have this introduction to a dynamic between two sisters who don't really get on with each other. And although you can see that they do kind of care for each other deep down, the fact that they dislike each other or are jealous of each other in certain ways, I think means that you were immediately drawn to the like negative traits of these characters rather than their positive ones, which is interesting because you kind of go in and you see these like two prickly characters who are very difficult with each other, and immediately you don't love them because you don't see the fact that they're lovable. Instead you see what the other one dislikes about them, if that makes sense. So instead of like falling in love with the characters right from the start, I feel like this is the type of book where instead you kind of have to grow to love them as the book goes on, and instead you kind of like see the mellowing of their prickles and kind of see the like good in them the more you get through the story, and you kind of see the truth of who they are rather than who they are through their jealous sister's eyes. And I think it's interesting that we see both sisters' perspectives, because you see that neither of them are actually a bad person and neither of them has done anything terribly wrong. You just see that they're different people and that they struggle to kind of get on with each other, that there's good within them both and also like admirable qualities within them both. And I think it's really nice how that kind of like becomes more and more apparent the further you get through the book, and I'm really enjoying seeing like the blossoming of their relationship as they start to like figure out how to live together and how to like coexist with each other. So I'm really enjoying that element, and of course the further we get through the story we're also seeing other characters, and I really do like how Jenny Corgan does always have like a key character whose story you're focused on. So in this instance it is Carmen and of course her like new job, but then she also really does such a great job of creating like a community around that main character and introducing lots and lots of little characters, some who are really insignificant to the overall plot and then some who end up being really instrumental in what happens. And one of the characters that I'm really loving in this one is the man who owns the bookshop. He is Mr. McCready, and he is a very, very like eccentric old guy who kind of feels like he's trapped in the past, and then Carmen's job in order to try and save the bookshop is essentially to kind of like pull him into the future, but also kind of, I guess, appreciate and like honour his quirks and honour the history of the bookshop and find a way to bring past and present together in a way that works like business-wise, but also for the guy who owns and loves the bookshop. So I'm really, really liking that, and I'm definitely starting to get those wholesome vibes the further we get through, which I'm obviously very much on board with. So I'm hoping to get through quite a bit more of this book later on today. I'm currently, like I said, about halfway through or just under halfway, but these are the types of books that are just so easy to get through because they're not complex, they're not convoluted, they're just like easy reads, and it's really like very digestible content. So I'm thinking that once I sit down later on, I should be able to just fly through most of this book, if not all of it. And I'm very excited to see where it goes and also where romance might make its way into the plot, because as of yet it hasn't been a very romance focused book, and I'm not mad about that, but I'm interested to see where and when the romance will crop up. So that is my thoughts on the Christmas Bookshop so far. And of course I am reading Persuasion as well, though my progress with this one is definitely a little bit slower. I'm currently on about page 50, well 49 to be precise, of Persuasion, so definitely slower progress, but progress all the same. And this book has 300 pages altogether, so it is definitely one of Jane Austen's shorter novels, which is great for me because I do like to read as much as I can, but also sometimes with classics, when they're longer, it can feel like an almost insurmountable task. So it's nice when you get to a classic that is just a little bit shorter and easier to get through. But what I'm really enjoying about this one is the beauty of hindsight, because I'm feeling like the message of this novel, like the moral centre of this book that the plot's around, is so much more obvious to me the second time around, and I think that has been the case with all of Jane Austen's books. Though she writes very entertaining, very funny and romantic novels, there is always some kind of deeper message in the characters and their growth and their understanding of themselves that sits at the centre of the book. So although it could be described as like frivolous entertainment, I think there is also some depth to her novels always beneath that entertainment, and that is something that I really like, because I think she manages to balance those two things very well, and it never feels preachy or like she's like overdoing the moral message, but I think it sort of grows very naturally with the characters, and you start to sort of understand them and understand the way that the mechanics of their relationships work gradually throughout, and I love seeing like that growth and the revelation of whatever the moral message may be. So in the instance of this book, I'm loving going back and reading it for the second time around, because I think the moral message is actually very clear from the very start once you have the context of where the novel is going. And for me, the message that jumps out of this book right from the beginning is to reserve judgment, essentially. I think it's as simple as not being so judgmental of other people, and this book is kind of like a warning tale against how having such I guess like harsh and quick judgments of people can essentially kind of like ruin your life. And I think this book is such an interesting way to tell that, because we have this retrospective look on these characters and decisions that they'd made previously that we then understand have like transformed the course of their life, and not necessarily for the better. And ultimately that all comes down to judging a character on their present circumstances and not appreciating the potential they have to change. And so the message I'm kind of taking from this book, and I think it's a really lovely one, is simply to not be so judgmental, and particularly not to allow someone's current circumstances to cloud your view of their entire person, because someone's present circumstances doesn't tell you a lot about who they are, who their ambitions might be to become, and like what work they might be putting in to change themselves. And yet we can allow ourselves to just see someone's job, for example, and make a judgment on who they are and their work ethic, and really that doesn't tell us a lot about the whole person. So I think this is a really great message to just like Focus on yourself for one thing, allow yourself to make your own judgments rather than allowing other people's words to kind of influence your view of other people, but also to kind of reserve judgment in general and just focus on yourself and doing what you want to do and not worrying about other people, because people will change and grow and we can't see that in the present moment, so we shouldn't allow that to influence the fact that we want to either spend time with someone or not. I feel like I've gone on a right waffle there, so I do apologise, but ultimately loving the message of this book, hashtag no judgment, and I think it's a really good one. So that's the reading update for the morning, not a quick one because I can talk for England apparently, I just can't stop. But anyway, it is Sunday morning. I'm just currently waiting for my mum to come round. We're going to go out for a coffee together, and then when I get back it will just be a cosy afternoon of reading and hopefully lots of it. Somewhat unexpectedly, I've ended up in a bit of a time crunch to read Persuasion. Now, you might be thinking, Kira, didn't you say that you're reading Persuasion for your very own Jane Austen read-along, for which you selected the dates and made the schedule? And to that I would have to say, yes, technically I am. So you also might be wondering, if that's the case, why is it a surprise to you that you have to be on a schedule and that you're now close to the deadline for having to read it? And the answer to that is that I was planning to do the live show in a couple of weeks' time, but I kind of realised that we were getting like way off of schedule, and essentially my inner calendar was just way off kilter, and I kind of didn't realise how short of a month February was. And you know, basically, long story short, I thought we had more time than we did, and actually the date that I wanted to do this live show on is in fact in 5 days time, because it is now Monday evening, I've finished work for the day, and I'm wanting to do the live show for this book this Friday. So essentially, I have only myself to blame for my lack of awareness of what date it was and how quickly time goes, but that doesn't change the fact that I now have 5 days in which to finish this book. However, I'm very pleased to report that after finishing work today, I did just settle down for some evening reading, and I'm now at the start of volume 2. So this book is split into 2 volumes, so I just got to volume numero dos, and that means that I'm about halfway through this book. So I'm feeling fairly optimistic, and what's more than that, I'm really enjoying it. I do think it's just so interesting how your perspective of a book can be so different when you're reading it for pleasure versus for studying, and I'm just really enjoying the book in general and the story. I do think it is probably the most distinct of Jane Austen's novels, in the sense that, as I mentioned, the age of the protagonist and the fact that this is like a return to an old love versus just like 2 people meeting for the first time. It's just a completely different dynamic to her other novels, and I think it's a really interesting one, and it totally makes sense to me that this was her final book, because of course this would be the one that she was like oldest when she was writing it, and it's interesting to see potentially how her perspective on love essentially changes throughout the novels, and like you can see it kind of like maturing and potentially like some more I guess like cynicism sort of coming through into the book, as maybe her own experiences had influenced that, and it's just really interesting. So essentially, the Christmas Bookshop is still chugging along in the background, but Persuasion is taking precedence because I have just 5 days to read it, and I know that my reading goes downhill on the work weekdays because I'm just so busy and I don't usually finish work until about 5:30 or 6 p.m, and because me and Jay get up so early, I'm usually in bed by like 8 p.m, so that means that I have a very minimal time for reading. So I'm just going to try and make the most of what little time I do have and make sure to just get through a few chapters every night. So with that in mind, I've got myself a lovely cup of tea. I've also got a snack, which for any other vegans out there, if you've not tried the Nomo caramel chocolate bar, I genuinely cannot recommend it highly enough because it is so good. It is just simply a milk chocolate filled with soft caramel, but although it's just a very simple concept, I personally find that these sort of like chocolate bars that are just like filled with caramel are really hard to find as a vegan, and there are just not that many options out there for filled chocolate bars. But I used to love Cadbury caramel before I was vegan, and this is just like that, and I absolutely love it. So I just wanted to shout that out because I think everyone should get their hands on it, but especially any other vegans who feel like they're missing out on their favourite chocolate from before they were vegan. So I've got my tea, got my snack, and I'm going to go ahead and do some reading of Persuasion. Happy Friday everyone. I'm very happy to say that on the day of my live show I have just finished up reading Persuasion by Jane Austen. What a relief that is, because as per usual I left it to the very last minute, but we did it as we always do. We pulled it back, finished it just on time, and it is done. So feeling very happy, very relieved. On the whole, I have rated this one 3 stars, which I think puts it definitely at the lower end of my Jane Austen ranking system, because I just don't find that the characters of this book are quite as interesting as some of her other ones. I think it is interesting to see a different dynamic in terms of romance and courtship, being, as I've mentioned already, an older protagonist and about kind of like a lost love rather than like an initial early courtship situation. So I think that in and of itself is very interesting as a concept, and it was interesting to see that play out. But on the whole, I think I do prefer that kind of like youthful romance that we get in her other ones, as we see ladies kind of like actively seeking out their marital partner, and all of the kind of like drama and sort of like confusion and mishaps that kind of come along with that. I find that to be a lot more fun to follow along with, whereas this one was probably like categorically maybe more interesting as like a base premise, but then in practice I just found that it wasn't quite as interesting. And as I think I mentioned yesterday, it was just like a little bit busy for my liking. There were quite a large amount of characters to follow along with, and it felt as though because of that a lot of the like conclusion and romance kind of was like funneled into a very short bit of the book at the very end, because the rest of it was kind of more about like, I guess, miscommunication, misunderstanding, things that weren't said, all of that kind of stuff, and the actual like conclusion of the romance was very short at the very end. So on the whole, glad to have finished it. I would probably say that I enjoyed it more so the second time around versus reading it at university, but I am happy to say that reading it at university was a good experience as well. Like, it was an interesting text to dissect, but as it turns out, it's just not my favourite Jane Austen novel, so that's fine. But it brings my All About Austen read along to an end, and also this vlog to an end, because as per usual, I've dragged it on for way too long by not being able to finish the book during the weekend. So my Jane Austen live show will of course already have gone up before this vlog does, so if you didn't manage to catch it live, then you can go and watch that over on my channel, which is right here. So I don't know why I said over, but you can watch that live show. It will be up on my channel. And then on the subject of live shows and announcements and interesting things, the video that Sarah and I filmed is going to be up next weekend, so watch out for that, because I think it's going to be a good one, and hopefully any of you guys who have joined in for the Jane Austen read along and have enjoyed doing some classics discussions will be very excited about the announcement that is coming out next week. So stay tuned for that, but thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.